Hello, welcome back. Now let us see how to create a Cosmos DB account. So in order to create Cosmos DB account, you could click on create resource and search for Cosmos and select Azure Cosmos DB. Now click on create. Now we need to enter some basic information like subscription, resource group, and an account name. This account name should be unique. And we have an option to select different API. Azure Cosmos DB provide 5 different kind of API, and depending upon your use cases, you could select any one of them. And I'm going to select core API. And the location I'm going to select West US. And I'm not going to change any other selection. Inside networking, I'm going to select all network. And I don't want to make any changes to backup policies. Encryption, I'm going to select service managed key. And tag, I'm leaving default, or I don't want to enter any tags. Inside review and create, you could see the overview of your selection. So it's going to deploy Azure Cosmos DB account in West US region, and it's going to use the subscription pay as you go. This deployment will take around 10 to 15 minutes. So let's click on create. And our deployment is started. So the deployment will take around 10 to 15 minutes. Now let's compare SQL-based database and NoSQL-based databases. So in the case of SQL-based database, we will install some software, relational database management system software, inside our server, or we could use cloud-based service like Azure SQL or managed instance. And once you install, you could create one or more database in your system. So you could create one or more database in your system, and inside each database, you could create one or more tables. And while defining the table or while creating the table, you could define the schema. What kind of data are you going to save inside that table? Say if you want to store 3 key attributes about your user, you will create a table something like this. Table with 3 columns, ID, name or password. And inside each column, you could specify what kind of value are you going to save and how the data are validated. So you could define the schema, what kind of data are you going to save inside this table, and you will save this data as rows. So for each user, you could insert data as separate row. And you could create one or more tables, and you could organize them by using database. And you could create all this system by using SQL. Now let's see how we could create NoSQL based database. So in the case of NoSQL or in the case of Cosmos DB, once you create a Cosmos DB account, you could create database. And within the database, you could create containers, which is similar to table in our normal database. And within the container, you could insert data as document. So you could save records as different document in your database, and you don't need to specify the schema while defining the container. Within the document itself, you could specify what kind of data are you going to store. So in the case of relational database, we will define schema within the table. And in the case of NoSQL database, you could store data as different document within your container. So we need to create database and container in our Cosmos DB account to store data. Look like our deployment is completed. Now let's click on go to resource. And in overview tab, you could see our database is online, or our account is online, and it's in West US region. Now in order to create database and insert data, we could use Data Explorer tab. Right now we don't have any database or container. So click on New Container, and you could create a container as well as database. So if you have any database, you could use existing database. So I'm going to enter the database as sample. And we need to specify the capacity for our database. How much capacity are you going to allocate for your database? And based on this capacity, you will be charged. And we will be allocating the capacity based on resource request unit, RU. So you could see, based on request unit, you will be charged. And I am going to specify 400 request unit for this database. And the data table name or container name, I'm going to call it as table1. And based on what kind of value you are going to store inside this table or inside this container, you could specify a partition key. So this will be used to replicate the data or to store data evenly across different nodes. And we will discuss more about this product partition key later. But we need to specify a partition key to store data in a logical manner. So I'm going to store data based on product ID. So my partition key is product ID, and that's it. So these are the basic information you need to fill in order to create a database and container inside Cosmos DB if you are using SQL based API. So let's click on OK. And this will take around 1 minute to create the database and container. So our database is ready, and you could see we have one container called table1, and we don't have any data. So data will be saved as different item, and we don't have any items. And we could add new item by clicking new item, and we need to enter this information in a JSON format. So I already created some data, dummy data. I'm going to save this data as a different item. So I'm going to store ID, product ID, category, and other information regarding my product in a JSON format. And once I click save, Cosmos DB will add some additional information to store this data in a systematic manner. So these are additional information added by Cosmos DB. So let's add two more items. So you could see we added two items. So total we added 3 items. And in order to process this data, we could use SQL or query something very similar to SQL. So you could see there is different icon, and once you click new SQL query, you will get a window something like this. And the statement is very similar to SQL. Select star from C. C means container. So if you execute this query, you will get all the records. So you could see there are 3 records, and you could see all these 3 records in JSON format.